Hey guys, what's happening? So with continuing our coverage on Immortal Thor, it's here where we see Dario Agger go into the next phase of his plan. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so coming back, we pick up with the return of Magni, the son of Thor and the Enchantress from an alternate future, which was destroyed when the Thor of that future, who had grown wrathful against mankind, teamed up with the Enchantress and old Loki, traveled back in time and unmade it, because in this dark future, Thor had eventually become the Lord of Midgard, and he changed everything into what he would call a model worldwide society. And it was very much a live long enough to see yourself become the villain kind of story. But when Thor eventually realized the error of his ways, to destroy this future, he came back to the modern day and gave himself those future memories, so he wouldn't make the same mistake again. And this worked, but as a result of undoing this future, this also got rid of Magni, who was born in that timeline. And Magni was considered to have the best parts of both Thor and the Enchantress. He was the god of strength, the hope of Asgard, and the Prince of Midgard. So even though this dark future was built on the older Thor doing a number of things that he wasn't proud of, when it was destroyed, the loss of Magni, it was basically the tragic part to how all that ended. So now with him here in the main timeline, the Enchantress is explaining to him how he got here, because Magni totally gets the idea of the Enchantress tricking Thor into helping her to pull this off, but what he doesn't understand is why. So she tells him it's because Thor's gonna die, which right there just goes back to the many prophecies of Thor's death, which mainly stems from what Thor was shown by the Black Winter. And I have the link below for when we covered that, for anyone who needs to go back and get filled in. But ever since, it's one of those things that's been hanging over Thor's head, and the way he sees it, when the time comes, he's not going out without a fight. And as far as the Enchantress is concerned, she's like, yeah, okay, it sounds good that Thor's confident, but if Thor's wrong, Asgard's gonna need an heir. And so right away, Sif's more or less like, okay, I get it. This is just Amora's way to become the power behind the power in the event of something happening to Thor. And the Enchantress doesn't necessarily shy away from it, because if it comes to that point sooner than later, she's absolutely going to embrace her position as Queen Mother. But while everyone here is just going on about Magni's future and him inheriting his father's throne, with the Enchantress being Queen Mother, he's just over here like, look, this Enchantress isn't actually my mother. Neither's this Thor my real father. And Thor's not necessarily trying to be that, but at the same time, as a result of Thor merging with those future memories, for him, in a way, he actually did lose his son. But it's not necessarily the case where Thor has all the memories of his alternate counterpart. He only has some, and really just enough to keep him from turning into that guy. But nonetheless, there's a part of Thor that's just glad to have Magni here. And it ends up giving us this moment where Thor tells Magni, there's a game that mortal fathers play with their mortal children. I always hoped that I would one day attempt myself, and that game is called Catch, as he tosses Magni Mjolnir, and he catches it. And so for Sif, who's been skeptical about all of this from the beginning, she tells Thor, I know that you now decide who's worthy to hold the hammer, Allfather, but to entrust Magni with it so soon? But even now, this isn't Thor making Magni worthy, because he's lifted Mjolnir before in the future, when his father, evil future Thor, was no longer able to. And there was even this whole thing in that story where everyone was told that the hammer was destroyed. But right here with Thor tossing Magni the hammer, there's a bit of that father-son moment that's happening here, but at the same time, it almost feels like he's testing him. Or if anything else, Thor's doing this to see the reaction of the Enchantress, who's quite surprised, but Thor points out here that the hammer is as heavy as it needs to be when it comes to whoever's trying to lift it. And when it comes to Magni, the god of strength, he's also what he needs to be, so it works out. But while they're playing catch, Thor asks Magni if his father ever took them hunting. So Magni's like, yes, and it would be nice to do again. And so he asks, what exactly are they hunting? And Thor tells him, supervillains. Which from here takes us over to Dario Agger's team, who at this point are all standing on the rooftop of Roxxon HQ. And they know that they're bait. In a way, they feel like Dario Agger's just set them up to go back to prison. And it's kind of funny because when Hyde gets upset here, King Cobra just tells him like, man, we're getting paid good. You're being too emotional. And Mr. Hyde just goes off like, of course I'm emotional. I am all dark emotions made flesh. And it's like you also got Grey Gargoyle, who's just like, yeah, this is a little weird, with all of them just standing here on the rooftop out in the open. And he's just like, man, I have no wish to return to an American prison. And it almost sounds like he would prefer a French prison. And to be honest, I couldn't tell you if one was better than the other. But then it's right here where Radioactive Man basically turns his nose up at everyone else, because he knows if this were to lead to all of them getting locked up, he would be taken to some unremarkable building and placed in an unremarkable room, and within the day, someone would come knocking at that door, because certain intelligence agencies have spoken to others, and he'll be asked politely to do something either very quiet or very loud. And when it's done, he'll just go home and count his money, because such is the life of a radioactive man. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, he's not wrong, but for him to just rub it in their face, as you would expect, it ruffles a few feathers. But in the middle of this, Grey Gargoyle spots the Rainbow Bridge heading towards them, which in this case feels very old school. But we're reminded here that the sight of the Rainbow Bridge, like actually seeing it in the Midgard sky, it's basically a way of letting everyone within a reasonable distance know that here comes Thor. This isn't an entrance that Mr. Hyde, Radioactive Man, and the others were expecting, because as of lately, the arrival of Thor has caused people to be afraid and uneasy. But when Thor shows up here with Magni, Sif, and the Enchantress, he tells these guys, "You began this, villains of Midgard, and now the gods of Asgard end it. When we are done, you will confess to every crime against me." Which right there is just referring to the pending charges that Thor has on Midgard right now, with people believing that he murdered Dario Agger. Which is also why when Thor gets here, he tells them, "Let's start with you telling me who's behind this." Because Thor believes that Dario Agger is still dead, so he doesn't know that Dario Agger is the one who put this team together. And just as a reminder, the whole reason these villains are on the rooftop with helicopters flying around is because Dario Agger wants the world to see that Thor is working with the Enchantress, since she took over Roxxon after Dario was killed. But nonetheless, when they get here, Mr. Hyde, he charges at Thor and Magni. And for a moment, Magni's just like, who's this guy supposed to be? So Thor tells him, Hyde, name for a tale, a mortal fiction that holds him like a demon, a brute of unimaginable strength. And it just has Magni like, unimaginable you say, just before he catches Mr. Hyde's punch with one hand and comes back with the crazy uppercut, because they don't call him the god of strength for nothing. And so after Hyde just slides back to the rest of the villains, Grey Gargoyle is looking at Hyde like, nah, I don't want no parts of that. But then it's here where Mr. Hyde tells King Cobra that he knows he has some of his serum, and he tells him to come up off it because he needs more. So King Cobra's like, a double dose? If I do that, it'll kill you. So Mr. Hyde tells him, if you don't, it'll kill you. More, I said. More. So King Cobra ends up giving it to him, and he's just like, man, make it count. And to buy him some time, he puts out his Cobra gas to hide them from Thor and the others, and he tells Grey Gargoyle to take advantage of the cover like before, since they're blinded. But I'm gonna tell you right now, none of this goes well for these guys. Because first of all, you got Sif, who guards the Rainbow Bridge. You know, sister of Heimdall. And I mean, it's not impossible to hide things from either Sif or Heimdall. We've seen that happen before. But this Cobra gas, it ain't gonna cut it. And in the case of Grey Gargoyle, who tries to sneak up on the Enchantress, this guy finds out really quickly that he's made a mistake because his powers are magic based. And to her, this spell is primitive and easily countered. So she ends up reversing it on Grey Gargoyle, turning him into like a shiny green emerald material. And when Thor sees this, he makes sure to tell Amora to make certain that this effect is only temporary, because the last thing he needs is to have people out here thinking that Thor and his goon squad done caught another body. But with this Cobra gas burning Magni's godly eyes, Thor clears things up, and for a moment it seems as if they only have Radioactive Man left. But after the Cobra gas is cleared out of the way, a towering Mr. Hyde is standing right behind Magni, and this dude is ready to get his lick back. And boy does he, because he punches Magni straight off of the roof. So quickly Enchantress has to catch him with her magic, since Magni's not able to fly by his own means. And it's not even so much the case of Magni being hurt by falling from a building, but Thor's more so concerned about who Magni would land on, because they would definitely be dead. But then it's here where Mr. Hyde goes for Thor, and all Thor does is just hold up Mjolnir, because why work hard when you can work smart? But just after that, Thor goes on to bring the hammer down on Hyde's head, because that's what he gets for punching his kid off of the roof. But after this is done, it's followed by a slow clap and a bravo from Radioactive Man, who's just like, oh yeah, that's great, 4 gods against 4 mortals. Like, way to go, Thor, because as it turns out, the Radioactive Man and the others, they've accomplished what they've come here to do, which again was show the world that the Enchantress was working with Thor, which only solidified the information that Dario Agger slipped out there about the Enchantress stealing his company. But even when the police show up and all of this gets televised, it's not like these cops are just gonna touch down and arrest them. So shortly after this, they head back to Asgard, so Magni can heal up, but at the same time, Thor, he realizes that his situation's just got worse. But the Enchantress, she really doesn't care, because to her, running Roxxon, it was nothing more than a game, so now that she's losing the company, that really doesn't mean much of anything to her. And following this, when we head back over to Dario Agger, who's watching the live news with it saying Asgardian terrorists escape justice. But to him, this went perfectly as planned, because now that the Enchantress is out of the way, he can place himself in position to get his company back. And the way that he plans to do this is by re-emerging with a new identity in about 3 weeks or so, with him coming back under the name of Dario Agger Jr., which, I mean, with the kind of money that he has, of course he can just invent a son and assume his identity after returning from his gruesome death. And after this, next we head back over to Dario's team of villains, who more or less knew that today's events were going to lead to them getting locked up, but as they're in transit to their private prison, Mr. Hyde is just laughing at Radioactive Man because of everything he was rubbing in their face earlier, only to be here with them heading to the same place. So Radioactive Man just lets them know. The only thing that's changed here is that they're all traveling to the same place, and as it turns out, that place is Daedalus LLC, Private Prison Solutions, and it's a subsidiary of Roxxon Incorporated. And so I'm not sure if this is connected to Dr. Daedalus or Project Safeguard, which combine dire wraiths with human tech, but I'm sure we'll find out soon. But if it is, I imagine it's going to tie much of what we've seen with Dario Agger and all the talk of his gods and his pantheon, with the villains of the world being the new pantheon. I imagine it's going to tie all of that to the larger story that we've seen going on in Immortal Thor, but we'll find out soon enough. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.